we need to have a serious conversation about the writing in Assassin's Creed, but more specifically the past 4 Assassin's Creed games. And before anybody starts typing up angry comments, let me just say this is just my opinion. I'm not speaking for anybody else. I've been playing this franchise since early, and watching the way the writing has fallen off has been nothing but frustrating and disappointing. Because, if you go back to the older games from around 2007 to even 2017, the focus of those games was very evidently on storytelling. Yes, some of them weren't the best, but there was a real effort to deliver a character-driven story. You had the main protagonist going through a clear journey, and every single mission felt like it actually pushed the plot forward. I mean, look at Ezio's life across Assassin's Creed 2, Brotherhood, and then Revelations. That's, in my opinion, one of the best character evolutions in gaming. Altair went from arrogant rookie to a more reflective and knowledgeable character. It's simple stuff, yes, but it's effective. I mean, even Connor and Haytham's chemistry in Assassin's Creed 3, it gave that specific story so much personality. Syndicate and Unity, I mean, 2 stories I wasn't really much of a fan of, but at least those stories were focused and were written to tell a tale about the protagonists. Now, fast forward to the modern Assassin's Creed games, so that's mainly Odyssey, Valhalla, and Shadows. These games still open strong. Ubisoft knows how to create prologues that pull you in. The first few hours often introduce a great backstory or a conflict that makes you want to see what happens next. And then the whole thing just flatlines. Instead of building momentum and creating an engaging story, the story drops you into this giant map with a bunch of targets on an objective board, or in Assassin's Creed Valhalla's case, a metric shit ton of regions to form alliances with, and you don't have to do them in the correct order, not that there is one. And to me, that's where everything falls apart. Here's why. When a story is non-linear, characters cannot actually grow or evolve. Say you fight target A before you fight target B. This means the writers cannot let target B reference target A's death whatsoever. If you can meet character X before meeting character Y, then the dialogue cannot change depending on who you met first. So the game plays it safe. The protagonists basically stay frozen in time, as in their personality, their growth, until you ticked every box. That's simply an absolutely horrendous way to write a story. There is absolutely no development, there's no emotional build-up whatsoever, and most importantly, there's no payoff until the very end. And then when the end comes, it's always underwhelming. And I know you guys watching this feel this way too. This is referred to as the villain of the week problem. It's a real term, by the way. Every region is its own little side story. So you meet a new NPC, you take out the local big bad guy, you collect a nugget of lore, and then you move on. Do that 10 times and congratulations, you finished the main goddamn story. This would be fine as side content, but when it's the actual backbone of the game, it just gets so repetitive. And by the way, if you're wondering which games I'm mainly referring to here, it's basically just Valhalla and Shadows, since they're the 2 most recent mainline entries. I'm not going to count Mirage in this instance because that was more of an attempt at a smaller linear style project from a studio that's never handled a mainline Assassin's Creed game before. Even then, Mirage still fell into the usual Ubisoft formula with generic targets on a board that nobody really cares about. Still, I won't be too hard on them as I will be towards Ubisoft Quebec and Montreal. But going back to non-linearity, Valhalla has plenty of examples. I mean, look at the Fulke and Sigurd storyline. I thought that storyline was genuinely great. It gave the game direction. But you see, halfway through, Ubisoft just puts it on hold. They park it. You're forced to spend hours upon hours clearing out random regions with their own isolated plots before the main story picks back up. I came across a Reddit post quite recently about just how much filler Valhalla has, and it honestly opened up my eyes. Check this out. 65% of Assassin's Creed Valhalla's arcs are filler. That means they add nothing to the main story with Eivor, Basim or Sigurd. That's ridiculous. Stretching out playtime like that is not good design. Now compare that to other open world games with smaller budgets, if not lower. And those open world games had linear stories like The Witcher 3, Ghosts of Tsushima. Those games respect your time. And they are also made by big AAA studios. But the difference is clear. Ubisoft runs on a business model focused on squeezing revenue, right up there with EA and Nintendo. The other studios I just mentioned from those other games, well, they're game developers first. That's the gap. It's a harsh truth, but it's reality. Why do you think Assassin's Creed Valhalla has made the most money for Ubisoft? It's ridiculed with microtransactions. Compare the first year of Assassin's Creed Valhalla to what it is now. It's absolutely night and day. To Ubisoft, that alone is enough reason for them to keep making these games with half-assed stories. But going back to Valhalla, by the time you go through all those filler arcs I just talked about and then finally return to Sigurd's story, that sense of urgency is gone. It feels like the game just hit pause for 40 to 50 hours and then just casually press play again. And Assassin's Creed Shadows has its own version of this problem. When I made this video on screen about my 100-hour experience with the game, I kind of fell into a trap I regret. I said I liked the story, but man was I wrong. That was recency bias talking. I did not give myself enough time to really sit with it and analyze it, because I made that video instantly the moment I rolled credits. But now that it's been 6 months since Assassin's Creed Shadows came out, I can look at it with clearer eyes. I think the story of Assassin's Creed Shadows is not good whatsoever. Opinions can change, and that's one of them. But in regards to Shadows, the idea of having two main protagonists sounds pretty cool, right? But you see, when you split the spotlight between Naue and Yasuke, neither one of them gets enough depth, and once the game tosses them into the non-linear target board, both Naue and Yasuke feel stuck in place. The funny part is, the best parts of Shadows are actually the linear personal stories. I'm talking about the flashbacks with Yasuke and Naue, which kind of proves the point. Linear writing just works better. And it's not just pacing either, this structure kills relationships. In Assassin's Creed 2, Ezio and Leonardo da Vinci became genuine friends because the story had space to build on their bond over time. Imagine if Assassin's Creed 2 was written by this modern Ubisoft, especially Ubisoft Quebec, and the way Shadows is. You could jump straight to Venice after the prologue, so Leonardo could not be a long-term ally. He'd probably just be a side character you would meet once and then never see again. That's basically how modern Assassin's Creed feels. Because characters pop in, they serve their little moment and then vanish forever. So yeah, that's the big shift. The older games had a spine. Each sequence you played mattered, and each assassination on a story-related character brought you closer to the end. Now it's all about giant boards of targets that you can do whenever. The trick is, it looks like freedom on paper, but no, it's not. And that's why even if some of these set pieces are great, the overall story just feels so much weaker than it used to. To understand why Assassin's Creed stories feel so weak now, you've got to look at what made the older ones hit so hard. And it all has to do with the structure and the right people behind the wheel. Let's start with the writers. Back in the day, Ubisoft had what you could call their narrative A-team. There's of course the man himself, Patrice Désilets, aka the creator of Assassin's Creed. I made a video going more in depth on his importance, so check that out if you want. There were the writers, so Darby McDevitt, Corey May, Joshua Rubin, Jeffrey Yohelem, and a handful of other senior writers who may or may not have turned into literal criminals, but we'll not get into that. But they were the ones shaping the lore. These were the people who literally built Assassin's Creed from the grounds up. The Ezio trilogy, the Desmond saga, the lore of the Isu, the modern day components. Some of these writers were Ivy League educated, seriously high IQ storytellers. I'm talking about Harvard, that type of educated. And you can tell, those early stories had cohesion and also recurring themes. You knew there was always going to be a bigger picture, and it all came from having strong narrative leadership. You can then look at the games after Syndicate. Most of the real talent was gone at that point, or starting to go. Ubisoft started shuffling writing duties between different teams with no real continuity or long-term vision, and it shows. Why the hell are multiple Ubisoft studios making mainline Assassin's Creed games at the same time? Quebec, Montreal, Bordeaux, Singapore, it should not work like that. No other studio does this or really does this, but the reason is simple: money. Ubisoft, as I said, is a revenue-driven company, so pumping out Assassin's Creed every year takes priority over quality. Whether the writing is weak or the passion is gone, they don't care, as long as it sells well. We can celebrate that Assassin's Creed Shadows did well and hooray. But if you think about it, should we really be celebrating this? It only encourages them to keep doing what they're doing, and it's not a coincidence that the departure of the great writers I talked about almost perfectly matches the point where the series writing dropped. The new writers are not bad, but they were not the original architects. Ubisoft also stopped giving narrative leads real influence. That's when the foundation cracked. Now, what actually worked in the older games? First off, character evolutions. As I said earlier, Altair goes from arrogant rookie to wise assassin. Ezio grows across 3 whole games, aging with you the player. Connor's story revolves around his complicated relationship with Haytham. I remember reading that the writers of Assassin's Creed 3 cared so much about the story that they tied it directly to the real Mayan calendar, the same one linked to the 2012 end of the world theories. Without writing it that way, the game itself wouldn't have even existed. If you compare that passion to today's protagonists, these were by no means generic at all. There were characters who changed and matured. And we also need to mention the side characters because that's one of the most important aspects to consider when writing great stories. Look at every single side character in Assassin's Creed Black Flag. That's what you call well written. You can say the same with Sean and Rebecca, even though technically they are still here. But you know, Ubisoft are very adamant on moving away from the modern day and instead focusing on the shit show that is this bullshit. I think another one of the biggest issues comes down to the villains. Not a single one in the RPG era Assassin's Creed comes close to characters like Cesare Borgia, Rodrigo Borgia, Charles Lee, Haytham, Bartholomew Roberts, Governor Torres, or even Al-Mualim. The list goes on. Compare that to what we have now. Flavius, awful. Demos, awful. I mean, Valhalla at least had Basim and Alfred, but that's the exception, not the rule. It's also no coincidence that Darby McDevitt was the narrative director for Valhalla. You see what I mean? After that, Mirage had Karbiha. Does anybody even remember her? And then there's Assassin's Creed Shadows. I'm not gonna lie, I forgot who the villains were, except for Oda Nobunaga. They were just a bunch of mass nobodies that left no impact whatsoever. That right there is the clearest downfall in the entire franchise. Even the memory corridors played a huge role. Those reflective, almost philosophical conversations were so essential to the writing. Now they've been completely scrapped. Why? To make the games more shallow and relatable for the lowest common denominator? It feels like the franchise has been dumbed down on purpose. And of course, there's the modern day. The modern day tied everything together. People will argue about whether they like the modern day or whether they like Desmond, but at least the modern day gave the franchise a backbone. You always knew why you were in the Animus and what the bigger threat was. Once Ubisoft dropped that, the games lost that anchor. It's funny because they progressed the modern day in Valhalla, and that game seemed to finally move the modern day forward again. We had Basim now, but that just ended up being scrapped because Mirage had no modern day. Assassin's Creed Shadows modern day is better off not existing, and we now have to worry if Assassin's Creed Hexe will have a modern day at all. And last but not least is pacing. The past games were not scared to be shorter. I mean, Assassin's Creed 2 and Brotherhood I think were both around 15 to 20 hours if you took your time. You did not get 40 hours of pure filler in between important story moments. That's why those games still feel meaningful in hindsight, because it's simply fat that never existed. It's really easy to point at Assassin's Creed and say, man, what happened to this franchise? But if you zoom out a bit, you'll notice the exact same issues are in every Ubisoft franchise today. This isn't just an Assassin's Creed problem, it's a Ubisoft problem as a whole. Look at Far Cry 6. I remember before that game came out, I thought it would be incredible. Giancarlo Esposito as the main villain, a beautiful world. But you know, once you get past that intro part, the story falls into the same pattern. Split the map into zones, pick whatever order you want, and slowly just grind. Far Cry 5 does also do that, but the difference is Far Cry 5 has a great base story. In Far Cry 6, the villain only shows up in pre-scripted cutscenes and doesn't actually react to you, which kills any tension. Avatar Frontiers of Pandora 2. I haven't played it personally, but I watched a playthrough. What I've gathered from my experience watching is it's got a fantastic world, but the story was weak. It's another checklist machine. It's like Far Cry but way weaker. And even Star Wars Outlaws. I dropped that game after 5 hours. It's the same blueprint all over again. It's like Ubisoft has become obsessed with making what you could call an anecdote machine. The idea is that you're supposed to make your own fun, but the problem is those anecdotes don't last. Gamers want the cool water cooler stories and a narrative that keeps you invested from start to finish. Instead, Ubisoft has leaned so hard into the do-it-your-own-way structure that the writing has become so bland. Everything gets stretched very thin because side content is treated like the main content, and by the time you finish, the story feels like a collection of errands. Now, to be fair, there are still bright spots. Valhalla had Alfred and Basim, who both turned out to be one of the better written antagonists in the series. Assassin's Creed Shadows had some personal quests for Naue and Yasuke that actually hit harder than the main storyline, because would you look at that, they're written linearly. Stuff like the Nuno Caro pass with Yasuke, and Naue's backstory with her father. But the fact that we have to point to side stories as the highlights kind of proves the point. The overall structure is broken. Okay, so we've spent a lot of time breaking down how Assassin's Creed has lost its edge when it comes to storytelling, but let's not end on doom and gloom. The thing is, these problems can be fixed. Ubisoft already has the blueprint in the older games, and with a few smart changes they could bring back fantastic storytelling into the franchise. The first thing Ubisoft has to do is bring back a linear story spine. Look at past games like the Ezio trilogy, Assassin's Creed 3, Unity or Syndicate. Say what you want about those games, but at least the story had direction. Each sequence that you played followed the last, and the main protagonist carried over. You always knew what you were working towards. Compare that to Valhalla, where you can spend 40 hours knocking out disconnected regions, and the main story just sits there frozen. Now, Ubisoft does not need to scrap the open world, they just need to start putting the main story as the focus, and stop putting it on a giant checklist. A linear path is so simple but effective, and the best open world games out there all have linear stories. Another big one is scale. Ubisoft keeps making these massive bloated maps that take 60, 70, even 100 hours to clear, but bigger is not always better if the story cannot keep up. Assassin's Creed Unity and Syndicate are proof. Paris and London were so incredibly detailed in terms of design, but those stories could be finished in 20 hours without losing any impact. That's the sweet spot. Have 20 to 25 hours of memorable storytelling. This will always beat 70 hours of pure filler. Next, Ubisoft needs to rethink the dual protagonist system. It's an interesting idea, sure, but it rarely works in practice. In fact, it never works. They tried it with Syndicate, which I think kind of failed. Assassin's Creed Shadows proved that too. Naoe and Yasuke are both interesting in their own right, but splitting the story down the middle left both of them underdeveloped. If they had made Naoe the only protagonist and Yasuke a strong supporting side character, kind of like a Leonardo from Assassin's Creed 2, the story would have had actual focus. You can't build two deep personal evolutions in the same space you would normally give one character room to breathe. You just don't have the resources or time to do that. Or maybe you do, but Ubisoft are lazy. Another huge piece of the puzzle is performance capture. Writing and motion capture go hand in hand. Think back to Brotherhood or Black Flag. The reason those emotional highs hit so well is because the actors had room to perform. It all worked because the characters did not feel like lifeless robotic puppets. Compare that to any of the past 4 Assassin's Creed games, where almost every single dialogue scene felt robotic. You could write the best script in the world, but if the delivery looks dead, nobody's going to care. You know, it's funny because imagine if Hideo Kojima himself wrote the best story in the world, but you put his story and mix it with the modern Assassin's Creed cutscenes. It would look so terrible. Imagine if Death Stranding's cutscenes were replaced with what Ubisoft does. Oh my god. There's also the modern day storyline. Love it or hate it, it gives the franchise direction. These days, the modern day sections feel like afterthoughts, or Ubisoft just skips them entirely. You can tell they're trying their hardest to move on, especially after looking at what Assassin's Creed Shadows has. Without a proper modern day storyline, the historical side of Assassin's Creed feels isolated, like anthologies instead of chapters in one full saga. And then finally, Ubisoft has to face the people problem. During their peak, they had great writers steering the ship. These were the architects of the lore, the people who gave the franchise continuity. If they're serious about fixing this, they need to put experienced narrative-focused people back at the top of the process. It's kind of sad when you think about it. Sam Lake, Hideo Kojima, Miyazaki, Neil Druckmann, and so many more. These are the creative faces of their studios. Gamers even look up to these people. Who the hell does Ubisoft have? Nobody. For years it was Patrice Désilets until, well, that whole situation happened. Maybe you can say Darby, but even then, he's quite reserved and barely works on things anymore. Oh, and they could even split responsibilities between their studios. Let Ubisoft Montreal handle the linear story-focused Assassin's Creed games, while Ubisoft Quebec focuses on the big experimental open-world stuff. I do think both styles have their place, but they should not be mashed into the same formula. Montreal has the pedigree for tight stories, especially as Darby McDevitt is still there, and he's currently working on Assassin's Creed XA. Ubisoft Quebec has proven it can handle the larger RPG sandbox. Just play to each studio's strength, and the franchise will benefit, I promise. At the end of the day, the fix isn't complicated. Assassin's Creed does not need to reinvent itself whatsoever. It just needs to remember what made it special in the first place, and bring back great storytelling again.